Tonight on Dreadful Visions, thousands of abandoned storage units are auctioned off every year after their owners stop paying the rent. Most contain nothing more than old furniture and forgotten memories. But every now and then, someone opens a unit that was never truly abandoned. Story 1. The unit that was still being used. Tyler Mason had spent the better part of 2 years watching storage auction videos online before finally deciding to attend one himself. At 29 years old, he wasn't expecting to strike it rich. His goal was simple: buy a cheap unit, sell whatever had value, and hopefully make enough profit to pay a few months of rent. On a cool Saturday morning outside Indianapolis, Indiana, nearly 30 people gathered in the narrow hallway of a self-storage facility as the manager rolled open one metal door after another. Most units were exactly what Tyler expected: broken couches, rusted bicycles, boxes of old clothes, mattresses no one wanted. By the time the auction reached Unit 214, half the crowd had already lost interest. The manager cut the lock, pulled the metal door upward, and stepped aside. A stale smell drifted into the hallway. The unit looked surprisingly organized. Plastic storage bins were stacked neatly against one wall. A workbench sat in the corner beside several toolboxes. There was an old recliner, a camping cooler, and what looked like expensive power tools hidden beneath a dusty tarp. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, just enough to suggest it had been sitting untouched for months. Bidding started low, but most buyers hesitated. No one could inspect the boxes, and without seeing what was inside, many assumed it wasn't worth the gamble. Tyler won the unit for just under $400. Even the auction manager seemed surprised. After signing the paperwork, Tyler was told he had 48 hours to empty the space completely. He returned that afternoon with a rented pickup truck and began sorting through everything. The first few boxes contained exactly what he'd hoped for: nearly new cordless drills, unopened tool sets, extension cords, camping equipment, and a collection of vintage fishing reels that he immediately recognized as valuable. By sunset, he estimated he'd already doubled his money. Before leaving, Tyler shut off his flashlight and pulled the storage door closed behind him. As he slid the new padlock into place, he noticed something odd. The concrete floor directly in front of the unit had fresh muddy footprints leading toward the hallway. He frowned. It hadn't rained in nearly a week. The footprints weren't there earlier that afternoon. Assuming another customer had walked past after stepping through a puddle somewhere outside, Tyler shrugged and drove home. The following morning, he returned to continue clearing out the unit. The moment he unlocked the door, something felt wrong. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic, just different. The recliner seemed to be sitting at a slightly different angle than he remembered. One of the plastic bins had shifted several inches toward the entrance. He stared at it for a moment before convincing himself his memory was playing tricks on him. After all, he'd spent hours moving things around the previous day. It was easy to forget where everything had originally been. As he continued unpacking boxes, he reached behind the workbench and found something he was certain hadn't been there before: a plastic grocery bag. Inside was a fresh deli sandwich. Still cold, still sealed. The receipt attached to the bag showed it had been purchased less than 3 hours earlier. Tyler slowly looked around the storage unit. No one else should have been able to get inside. He had the only key to the new lock. Trying to explain it away, he convinced himself the sandwich had probably been buried beneath another box and only became exposed after he'd started moving things. It sounded reasonable enough, until he noticed the bottle of water sitting beside it. There were tiny droplets of condensation running down the sides. Ice still floated inside. Someone had been here, very recently. A strange feeling settled over him. For the first time since buying the unit, Tyler stopped thinking about what he might find inside the boxes. Instead, he started wondering if the previous owner had ever actually left. Story 2. The locked unit at the end of the hall. Marcus Hill had worked exactly 12 days at West Ridge Self-Storage outside Phoenix, Arizona, when everyone started mentioning Unit 417. No one talked about it for very long. It would come up in conversation for a few seconds before somebody quickly changed the subject. The first time Marcus heard about it was during his lunch break. One of the older employees casually pointed toward the last building on the property and said, "Stay away from the very last unit if you're working late." Marcus laughed. The man didn't. When Marcus asked why, the employee simply shrugged. "Management says it's part of an insurance investigation. Don't open it. Don't cut the lock. Don't even bother checking it." Marcus assumed it was some kind of legal dispute over stolen property. Storage facilities dealt with things like that all the time. People stopped paying rent. Units went to auction. Families argued over ownership. Insurance companies got involved. Nothing unusual. But over the following week, he noticed something strange. Every morning during his rounds, every single storage unit looked different. Customers came and went. Doors opened. Moving trucks arrived. People loaded furniture. Except Unit 417. The large blue roll-up door at the very end of the hallway never changed. Same heavy padlock. Same faded warning tag hanging from the latch. Same layer of dust across the bottom. It looked as though nobody had touched it in years. Yet every evening, when Marcus completed his final inspection before locking the gates, he found something odd. Fresh footprints. Not leading toward the unit. Leading away from it. One set. Always beginning directly outside the door. Always disappearing farther down the hallway. He checked after rain. After dry weather. Even after the maintenance crew pressure washed the concrete. The footprints kept appearing. He eventually mentioned it to his supervisor. The man didn't even look up from his paperwork. Probably maintenance. Marcus explained that the prints only appeared outside one unit. The supervisor finally sighed. "Listen, don't worry about 417. Corporate handles that one. If you hear anything over there after closing, ignore it." That answer bothered Marcus more than the footprints. A few nights later, he was working alone after another employee called in sick. The facility closed at 9. By 10:30, the entire property was silent. Marcus drove a small maintenance cart between the buildings, checking that every hallway was empty before setting the overnight alarms. As he approached the final building, the motion lights flickered on one by one. Rows of metal storage doors reflected the harsh white LEDs. Everything looked perfectly normal, until he reached the end. Knock. Marcus stopped the cart. Another knock echoed down the hallway. Slow. Solid. Metal against metal. It had come from Unit 417. He climbed out of the cart and listened. Nothing. He told himself the building was cooling after another brutally hot Arizona day. Metal expanded. Metal contracted. Old buildings made strange noises. He turned around to leave. Knock. 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 3 evenly spaced hits. This time there was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, had knocked from inside the locked storage unit. Marcus grabbed his radio. Unit 417. Anyone still on site? Only static answered. He slowly walked toward the door. The faded warning tag hanging from the latch read, "Do not remove. Property under legal hold." He pressed his ear against the cool metal. For several seconds, he heard absolutely nothing. Then, a quiet voice, barely louder than a whisper. It sounded like a man. "Please, can you let me out?" Marcus stumbled backward so quickly he nearly fell onto the concrete. His heart pounded as he stared at the locked door. The voice came again. Calm. Weak. Almost exhausted. "I've been waiting." Marcus immediately called 911. Within minutes, police officers and his supervisor arrived at the facility. Marcus expected them to cut the lock immediately. Instead, his supervisor stepped in front of the officers and quietly said something Marcus couldn't hear. To Marcus's disbelief, no one touched the door. To Marcus's disbelief, no one touched the door. One of the officers asked Marcus to repeat exactly what he'd heard. He explained the knocking, the whisper, and the voice asking to be let out. When he finished, the supervisor quietly admitted something he'd apparently been hiding for years. The storage unit had belonged to a local contractor who disappeared nearly 6 years earlier. He'd rented Unit 417 for almost a decade, always paying on time. Then, without warning, the payment stopped. When the facility prepared to auction the unit, the contractor's family produced legal documents claiming some of the contents were tied to an ongoing insurance dispute involving several expensive construction projects. A court ordered the unit sealed until ownership could be settled. Since then, nobody had legally entered it. The original padlock had remained untouched. Marcus looked back at the door. Then who was talking? The supervisor didn't answer. Instead, he unlocked a cabinet in the office and produced a thick binder containing incident reports. Over the past 6 years, there had been more than 20 complaints involving Unit 417. Customers reported hearing knocking while unloading nearby. Night employees occasionally heard someone speaking through the door. One maintenance worker even claimed he'd heard someone slowly pacing back and forth inside. Every report ended the same way. No evidence found. Marcus couldn't believe what he was reading. If so many people had reported the same thing, why hadn't anyone opened the unit? The answer arrived less than an hour later. A judge had finally authorized police to break the seal. An evidence technician photographed every angle before an officer used a large pair of bolt cutters to snap the rusted padlock. The heavy metal door rattled as it slowly rolled upward for the first time in years. Everyone stood back. Flashlights illuminated the dark interior. Dust floated through the beams of light. The storage unit was completely full. Old filing cabinets, stacks of cardboard boxes, shelving units, plastic containers. Everything sat exactly where it had apparently been left years earlier. There wasn't enough room inside for anyone to hide. Officers searched every inch anyway. Nothing. No secret compartments. No crawl space. No trapped person. Marcus felt embarrassed. Maybe stress had gotten the better of him. Then one detective called everyone over. Near the back wall sat a dusty wooden desk. On top was an old cassette recorder connected to a timer. The batteries had long since corroded, but beside it lay several cassette tapes carefully labeled by date. Investigators later restored the recordings. The contractor had been working alone inside the storage unit during evenings while organizing paperwork for a lawsuit against several former business partners. Fearing someone might break in and destroy evidence, he'd begun recording himself every night in case anything happened. Most tapes contained hours of silence interrupted by ordinary sounds. Moving boxes, opening drawers, talking to himself while sorting files. But the very last recording ended differently. His voice suddenly became nervous. He said he'd heard someone walking outside his storage unit after closing. He called out several times. No answer. Then the recording captured 3 slow knocks against the metal door. Exactly the pattern Marcus had heard. The contractor cautiously walked toward the entrance. The cassette picked up the sound of the latch rattling. Then, his frightened voice quietly said there was someone standing outside. Several seconds passed. Finally, the recording ended with one sentence. "Whoever you are, you're not supposed to be here after closing." No further sounds were captured. The contractor was never seen again. Police concluded he had likely stepped outside to investigate and disappeared somewhere beyond the camera coverage years earlier. The case remains unsolved. Marcus resigned from West Ridge Self-Storage before the end of the month. People often asked whether the whispers from Unit 417 had finally stopped after it was emptied. Marcus always gave the same answer. The voices were never coming from inside the storage unit. They only started after someone stood outside the door. Story 3. Someone paid my rent before I could. After graduating from college, Noah Bennett found himself in the middle of one of the most stressful months of his life. His lease had ended unexpectedly. His new apartment wouldn't be ready for another 6 weeks, and nearly everything he owned had to go somewhere in the meantime. A friend suggested renting a small storage unit on the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee. It was inexpensive, secure, and only a 15-minute drive from where he was temporarily staying. Noah rented Unit 128, stacked his furniture neatly inside, locked the door, and didn't think much about it. The monthly payment was due on the first Friday of every month. Noah set a reminder on his phone and forgot about it. 3 weeks later, while checking his email during lunch, he noticed a receipt from the storage company. Payment received. He frowned. He hadn't paid anything. Assuming the company had accidentally charged the wrong customer, he called the office. The receptionist pulled up his account. Everything looked normal. According to their system, the monthly rent had already been paid in full that morning. Using cash, Noah explained there had to be some mistake. The receptionist apologized but confirmed the payment had definitely been made on Unit 128. Since the account showed no outstanding balance, there was nothing else she could do. Confused, Noah drove to the facility after work. The office manager reviewed the payment records again. Same answer. Someone had walked into the office shortly after opening, handed over cash, requested that Unit 128 be paid for another month, collected a printed receipt, and immediately left. The manager assumed it was Noah's father or another family member helping him out. No identification had been requested because cash payments were common. Noah laughed awkwardly. Nobody in his family even knew where he rented the unit. The manager suggested it might simply be an administrative error. It sounded unlikely. Still, there wasn't much else to do. The following month, Noah made sure to arrive early on the due date. He wanted to pay before anyone else could. He walked into the office just after 8 in the morning. The receptionist smiled politely. "You're here a little late today." Noah frowned. "Late?" She turned her monitor toward him. The payment had already been processed. At 7:41 a.m. Again. Cash. Again. Someone else had paid. This time, Noah asked to see the security cameras covering the office entrance. The manager agreed. The footage showed a man entering just before opening. He wore a dark baseball cap, sunglasses, and a gray hoodie despite the summer heat. He kept his head lowered the entire time. He paid in cash, accepted the receipt, walked outside, then disappeared beyond the parking lot cameras. The video never showed his face. Noah couldn't recognize him. The manager offered to contact police. Noah declined. Technically, whoever this person was hadn't committed a crime. They'd only paid his storage bill. Even so, something about it didn't feel generous. It felt intentional. That afternoon, Noah decided to check the contents of his unit. Everything appeared exactly where he'd left it. His couch, television, boxes of books, kitchen supplies. Nothing looked disturbed. He locked the door again and started walking back toward his car. Halfway across the parking lot, he stopped. The storage unit door was slightly open, only an inch. He was certain he'd locked it. He hurried back. The padlock still hung from the latch. Locked. Yet somehow, the metal door had been pulled upward just enough to leave a narrow gap. His pulse quickened. He slowly lifted the door the rest of the way. Inside, everything still looked untouched, until he noticed something sitting on top of one of his moving boxes. A fresh white envelope. Across the front, written neatly in black ink, were just 4 words. "You're welcome." Nobody else should have been able to get inside Unit 128. Yet somehow, someone clearly already had. Noah picked up the envelope carefully. There was nothing else inside. No money. No explanation. Just the 2 handwritten words. "You're welcome." He immediately checked every box near the entrance, expecting to find something missing. His television was still there. Laptop monitor. Camping equipment. Winter clothes. Even a small lockbox containing old family photographs remained untouched. Nothing had been stolen. If anything, whoever entered the unit had gone out of their way to leave everything exactly as they'd found it. That night, Noah drove to an electronics store and bought a battery-powered motion camera with cloud recording. He mounted it high in the back corner of the storage unit, pointing directly at the entrance. If someone came back, he wanted to know who it was. 3 nights passed without a single alert. On the 4th morning, his phone vibrated during breakfast. Motion detected. 2:46 a.m. His heart immediately began racing. He opened the recording. The storage door slowly rolled upward. A man stepped inside wearing the same baseball cap and gray hoodie from the office security footage. His face remained hidden beneath the brim. He wasn't carrying any tools. He wasn't armed. He didn't even glance toward Noah's belongings. Instead, he walked calmly to the very back wall of the storage unit. He knelt beside an old wooden dresser Noah had placed there weeks earlier. With surprising familiarity, the man slid the dresser several inches to the side. Behind it, a narrow rectangular panel had been cut into the concrete wall. The stranger removed the panel, reached inside, paused for several seconds, then quietly replaced it exactly as before. He slid the dresser back into its original position, looked around the unit one final time, and left without touching anything else. The entire visit lasted less than 4 minutes. Noah replayed the video again and again. Whatever this man wanted, it wasn't his furniture. It was whatever had been hidden inside that wall long before Noah rented the unit. He drove straight to the facility. The manager watched the footage in complete silence. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally, the manager unlocked the unit and helped Noah move the heavy dresser away from the wall. The rectangular panel blended almost perfectly into the concrete. It would have been impossible to notice unless you already knew it existed. Using a pry bar, maintenance carefully removed it. Inside was a narrow cavity just large enough to hold a weatherproof metal case. The case was unlocked. It contained stacks of passports under different names, bundles of cash wrapped in plastic, several burner phones, and dozens of counterfeit driver's licenses. Police arrived within minutes. Federal investigators soon determined the storage unit had once been rented by a member of a large identity fraud operation years earlier. Before abandoning the unit, someone had hidden the evidence inside the wall, planning to return later. When the rental expired, the organization lost access before recovering the cash. They had no way of knowing the unit had been rented to someone new. The mysterious man hadn't been paying Noah's monthly rent out of kindness. He'd been keeping the unit active, as long as Noah unknowingly remained the legal renter. The hidden compartment stayed protected from auction, demolition, and routine inspections. Investigators later arrested several people connected to the operation. The man from the security footage was never identified. Noah emptied Unit 128 that same afternoon. Before leaving, one detective showed him something recovered from inside the hidden compartment. It was a folded sheet of paper containing every monthly payment made on the storage unit over the previous year. Each payment had one handwritten note beside it. "Keep it rented. Don't let anyone else have it." Noah often thinks about how close he came to ignoring those mysterious payments. Because if he had simply accepted the free rent without asking questions, he might have spent years unknowingly protecting a secret that someone was willing to risk everything to keep hidden. Story 4. The auction winner never came back. Ryan Foster had built a modest following on YouTube by filming storage unit auctions across the Midwest. He wasn't one of those loud creators chasing fake reactions or stage discoveries. His audience liked him because he stayed honest. If he lost money on a unit, he admitted it. If he found nothing valuable, he showed everything anyway. By the summer of 2026, his channel had grown to just over 80,000 subscribers, and every Saturday, thousands of people tuned in to watch him explore whatever abandoned storage unit he'd won that week. Late one August morning, Ryan attended an auction at an aging storage facility outside St. Louis, Missouri. Nearly every unit sold quickly. Old furniture, holiday decorations, broken appliances, nothing unusual. Then the manager rolled open Unit 309. The hallway immediately fell silent. Unlike the other units, this one looked strangely untouched. Everything inside was covered with white dust sheets. A grandfather clock stood against one wall. Several antique wooden cabinets lined the back. Paintings leaned carefully against stacks of sealed moving boxes. It looked less like abandoned storage, and more like someone had packed up an entire house in a single afternoon. The bidding was surprisingly quiet. Most buyers assumed expensive-looking antiques usually meant expensive restoration. Ryan won the unit for just under $700. Even he admitted to his camera that he'd probably overpaid. That afternoon, he uploaded the auction footage and promised subscribers he'd return the next morning to reveal everything inside. The video performed well overnight. Thousands of comments guessed what might be hidden beneath the dust sheets. The following morning, Ryan arrived alone with 2 cameras. One handheld, one mounted on a tripod recording a wide angle. After unlocking the unit, he spent nearly an hour uncovering furniture and sorting through boxes. Most of it turned out to be ordinary. Old dining chairs, family photo albums, silverware, vintage lamps. Nothing valuable enough to justify the purchase. He joked to the camera that this might be his biggest loss yet. Then he reached the back corner. Hidden behind 2 large wardrobes stood a tall wooden bookshelf. Something immediately caught his attention. The shelf wasn't sitting flush against the wall. There was a narrow gap behind it. Ryan assumed the movers had simply pushed it into place unevenly. Setting his camera on the tripod, he began sliding the heavy bookshelf sideways. It moved much more easily than expected. Behind it, he didn't find concrete. He found another door, a full-sized wooden door, painted the exact same gray color as the storage unit walls. No handle, no lock, no hinges visible from the outside. Ryan stared at it in complete silence. Storage units weren't built with interior doors. His handheld camera captured him nervously laughing. He even joked that he'd finally found something worth filming. Walking closer, he knocked lightly against the wood. It sounded hollow, as if there were another room behind it. He looked back toward the tripod camera, still recording. Without thinking much about it, Ryan reached forward and pushed. The door slowly swung inward. A cold draft flowed into the storage unit. His flashlight illuminated a narrow hallway stretching into darkness. Concrete floor, concrete walls, no storage lockers, no pipes, no electrical equipment, just a long corridor disappearing beyond the beam of light. Ryan whispered that none of this made any sense. The building plans he'd seen at the office showed Unit 309 sitting against the outer wall of the property. There shouldn't have been any space behind it at all. He hesitated for several seconds before picking up both cameras. If this was some forgotten maintenance corridor, it would make for an incredible ending to the video. He took one careful step inside, then another. The beam of his flashlight revealed dozens of old footprints pressed into the dust. Some looked years old, others looked fresh. Ryan slowly turned his camera toward the ground. The fresh footprints didn't lead away from him. They were coming directly toward the hidden door. Ryan slowly turned his camera toward the ground. The fresh footprints didn't lead away from him. They were coming directly toward the hidden door. For several seconds, he didn't move. His flashlight followed the trail deeper into the narrow hallway. The footprints were clearly visible in the thick layer of dust, each one sharply defined. Whatever had made them had walked toward the hidden door recently enough that the dust hadn't settled back over them. Ryan quietly called out, "Hello?" Only the sound of his own voice echoed back through the corridor. He took another cautious step forward. The hallway extended nearly 40 feet before ending at a heavy steel security door that stood slightly open. Rust covered most of its surface, but the floor beneath it was surprisingly clean, as though it had been used over and over again. Ryan glanced back toward the hidden doorway leading into the storage unit. Sunlight still spilled through the opening. He wasn't far from the exit. Trying to calm himself, he convinced himself the corridor had probably been part of the building's original construction before later renovations covered it up. It was strange, but not impossible. As he approached the steel door, something on the floor caught his attention. A disposable coffee cup. The logo belonged to a convenience store less than 5 miles away. The receipt tucked beneath the lid showed it had been purchased the previous afternoon. Ryan slowly picked it up. The coffee inside was gone. Whoever had left it had been standing in that hallway less than 24 hours earlier. His breathing became noticeably heavier. He whispered to the camera that somebody had definitely been down there recently. Then he pushed the steel door open. Behind it was a small concrete room. Old filing cabinets lined one wall. Several shelves held dusty binders and maintenance manuals. In the center of the room sat a folding chair. Directly in front of it, a television, an old security monitor. It was still on. The screen cycled through live camera feeds from different parts of the storage facility. The front gate, the office, the auction building, the parking lot, every entrance. Ryan froze. Someone had been watching the entire property. The camera in his hand captured a quiet buzzing sound coming from the monitor. Then, another sound, a metal door closing somewhere behind him. Ryan spun around. The hallway was empty. The hidden doorway back into Unit 309 was still open, but the sunlight had disappeared. Something was blocking it. He aimed his flashlight toward the opening. A figure stood perfectly still inside the storage unit, too far away to make out clearly. Just the outline of someone standing in the doorway, watching. Ryan called out, asking if anyone was there. The figure didn't answer. It simply took one slow step forward, then another. Ryan immediately backed into the concrete room. His breathing echoed through the microphone. He kept the flashlight pointed toward the hallway. The figure never hurried. It just kept walking, steady, silent, until it reached the steel doorway. Ryan's flashlight finally illuminated its face. An older man with an unshaven beard and tired eyes stared directly into the lens. Without changing expression, he quietly spoke 6 words. "You're not supposed to film this place." The recording ended there. Ryan never uploaded part 2. His subscribers spent days asking where the promised video had gone. When family members reported him missing, investigators searched the storage facility. Unit 309 had already been emptied. Nothing remained inside except Ryan's tripod camera. Its memory card contained exactly the footage investigators expected. The auction, the hidden doorway, the corridor, the security room, and the final 6 words. Police searched every inch of the building. They found no hidden exits beyond the corridor. No fingerprints that could identify the older man. No trace of Ryan. Months later, detectives discovered something they hadn't noticed during the initial investigation. The security monitor in the hidden room had been recording continuously onto an internal hard drive. Most of the footage had been overwritten. Only the final few minutes remained. It showed Ryan entering the corridor with both cameras. It showed him reaching the security room. Then, before the unidentified man ever appeared on Ryan's own recording, the monitor captured someone else already standing behind Ryan, watching him, perfectly still, just outside the range of his flashlight. To this day, Ryan Foster has never been found. His channel is still online. The final upload ends with a promise that part 2 would be posted the following evening. It never was. Story 5. There was another door inside my storage unit. Evan Brooks had rented storage units before, but only for short periods while moving between apartments. This time was different. At 34 years old, he'd accepted a new job in Denver, Colorado, and needed somewhere to keep most of his belongings while his new home was being renovated. He chose a newer self-storage facility on the edge of the city because it advertised 24-hour surveillance, electronic gate access, and climate-controlled units. Everything about the place felt clean, modern, and secure. His unit was 602. It sat alone at the far end of the newest building. The manager joked that Evan was lucky because it was one of the largest units they had left. Over the next weekend, Evan filled it with furniture, moving boxes, camping gear, and several family heirlooms that he didn't want left inside the temporary apartment. Once everything was inside, he locked the heavy roll-up door and drove away. For nearly 3 weeks, he didn't return. When he finally came back to collect a few winter clothes, something immediately caught his attention. The air inside the unit felt colder, not because of the climate control. It felt like a constant draft. He looked around for an open vent or damaged wall, but couldn't find anything unusual. As he walked toward the back of the unit, he heard a faint rattling sound. Metal, very soft, almost rhythmic. It stopped as soon as he stood still. He searched for several minutes before giving up. The following week, he returned again. This time, the rattling started almost immediately. It seemed to come from somewhere behind a tall set of industrial shelving he'd placed against the rear wall. Assuming one of the shelves wasn't level, Evan pulled everything off and carefully dragged it away from the wall. The sound stopped. Behind the shelving was a section of painted drywall. At first glance, it looked completely ordinary. Then he noticed the outline. A rectangle, roughly 6 feet tall. The paint perfectly matched the surrounding wall, but under the right light, the shape was impossible to ignore. It looked exactly like a hidden door. There was no handle, no visible hinges, just a narrow seam running around all 4 sides. Curious, Evan pressed against it. Nothing. He knocked. It sounded hollow. The rest of the wall produced a solid thud. This section echoed. He photographed it and walked to the office. The manager frowned the moment he saw the pictures. That's impossible. There aren't any doors back there. Evan insisted on bringing him to the unit. The manager examined the wall for nearly a minute. Finally, he admitted he'd never noticed it before. Using the original building plans stored in the office, they confirmed that Unit 602 should have ended exactly where the wall stood. There wasn't supposed to be another room behind it. Maintenance arrived later that afternoon. After several attempts, one employee discovered a tiny recessed latch hidden beneath multiple layers of paint. The wall swung open like a concealed door. Beyond it was a narrow concrete hallway. No lights, no windows, just enough space for one person to walk through comfortably. The manager stared into the darkness. None of this appears on the blueprints. He called the facility owner immediately. The owner instructed everyone to stay out until he arrived. That should have been the end of it. But curiosity has a way of making reasonable people ignore good advice. While the manager stepped outside to take another phone call, Evan switched on his flashlight. He took one careful step into the hidden hallway. The beam illuminated dusty concrete stretching farther than he expected. The passage continued behind multiple storage units. Every few yards, there was another hidden door, each one connected to a different rental unit. Then Evan noticed something that made him stop walking. The thick layer of dust covering the floor wasn't untouched. There was a single trail of fresh footprints leading deeper into the passage. They hadn't been there for years. They had been made. Earlier that day. They hadn't been there for years. They had been made. Earlier that day. Evan's first instinct was to turn around. Instead, he followed the footprints. Each step echoed softly through the narrow corridor. The passage stretched behind the rear walls of multiple storage units, hidden from every customer renting on the other side. Every 10 or 15 feet, another concealed door appeared, each identical to the one inside Unit 602. Some looked as though they hadn't been opened in years. Others showed faint scrape marks near the bottom, as if they had been used recently. The footprints continued deeper into the darkness. Then they stopped, not because the person had turned around, because they had entered one of the hidden doors. Evan aimed his flashlight at the opening. Unlike the others, this door stood slightly ajar. Before he could move any closer, his phone rang. It was the storage facility manager. "Where are you?" Evan admitted he'd stepped into the hallway. The manager immediately told him to get out. The owner had arrived with police, and nobody wanted anyone wandering through an unknown part of the building. Evan turned around and hurried back. Within minutes, officers entered the hidden passage with much brighter equipment. The first thing they noticed was exactly what Evan had seen: fresh footprints. One detective quietly commented that the dust everywhere else looked untouched for years. Only one trail appeared recent. The officers followed it to the partially open door. Behind it wasn't another storage unit. It was a small room roughly the size of a walk-in closet. Inside sat a folding chair, a battery-powered lantern, several empty food containers, bottled water, a sleeping bag, and a wall covered with handwritten notes. The notes listed dozens of storage unit numbers. Beside each number were dates, arrival times, departure times, how often customers visited, whether they came alone, how long they stayed. Someone had been quietly observing renters for months, perhaps even years. One officer noticed something even stranger. Unit 602, Evan's unit, already had notes beside it. Moved in Saturday. Usually arrives after 6 p.m. Still unpacking. Lives alone. Evan felt physically sick. He had rented the unit less than 3 weeks earlier. Someone hidden inside the walls had already learned his routine. Police searched the remainder of the hidden corridor. It eventually connected to an abandoned maintenance staircase leading into an unused section of the original warehouse that had existed before the current storage facility was built decades earlier. The renovations had sealed most of it away, almost all of it. Investigators believed someone had discovered the forgotten passage years earlier and quietly transformed it into a private route connecting dozens of storage units without ever appearing on security cameras. Despite an extensive search, nobody was found. The sleeping bag was still warm. A half-finished bottle of water sat beside the chair. Whoever had been living there had escaped only minutes before police entered. The facility permanently closed the following month while contractors demolished every hidden passage behind the storage units. During the renovations, workers uncovered something that explained why no one had discovered the corridor sooner. Every hidden access door had been professionally disguised from the inside. Once closed, each blended perfectly into the rear wall of its storage unit. Unless someone already knew where to look, they simply looked like ordinary walls. Evan moved his belongings out that same week. Months later, detectives contacted him one final time. Contractors had found a small notebook wedged behind loose concrete near the abandoned staircase. The final pages contained one chilling reminder that whoever had built the secret observation room had never considered themselves a thief. The last handwritten sentence read, "I never took anything. I only wanted to know who was living next door." After hearing that, Evan stopped using storage facilities altogether, because every time he walked past rows of identical metal doors, he couldn't help wondering whether there was another hallway hidden behind them, and whether someone was still quietly watching from the other side.